When I was pregnant with Ruth, I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes, and so they had planned to induce me on her due date, and I thankfully went into labor the day before.
Oh yeah.
And after a long labor, Ruth eventually came to this world via C-section. And while we were in the hospital for about 36 hours after her birth, we requested a visit from a lactation consultant, and two came to visit separately. And they both suggested that my milk would come in within a couple days. And I think we just expected that would be the case. And things didn't totally go as planned in that regard.
Kate's milk was delayed, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It didn't totally come in probably until 2.5 weeks, maybe, right? 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks, something like that. And you were the only person that ever talked about that with us being an expected delay.
Expected, yeah.
Yeah, and so
due to the C-section and the gestational diabetes.
Yes,
Right.
that's right. Mm-hmm.
And so hearing that as being within like the normal spectrum of expectations totally changed our thinking, right? Because we had been thinking like everything's out of whack. Why isn't it working? What's going on?
What are we doing wrong?
Yeah,
I see.
Whereas the answer was really everything's fine.
Right.
You're doing everything right. And here we are at 3.5 weeks, and the milk's in, the baby's feeding fine, everything's fine.
Yeah. But then it wasn't just sitting around waiting for the milk to come in. There were a lot of steps that y'all were amazing in taking to ensure that you could meet your breastfeeding goals. So.
The thing that I think helped us the most was that you were very encouraging and talked about our situation in very optimistic terms.
Oh yeah.
And then in very tangible terms, you helped us devise a plan for, if memory serves, the next 7 days and how we would get this girl fed over the course of those 7 days. And for us, that involved pumping and breastfeeding and supplementing with formula. And so it was this, as I think you described it, you said it's going to be a very intense and hard 7 days.
At the beginning, she would pump and it'd be like 11 milliliters of milk or whatever, right? It's just this insanely small amount.
Yeah.
But then 2 days later, it was consistently 20 milliliters, and then 2 or 3 days later, it was consistently 50 milliliters, and now it's like up to 100 or 110. And so,
if we hadn't have talked about that, you would have seen 11 milliliters and been very discouraged by that.
Right, like once you talk about it to us, we were kind of like, oh well, great, then I'll stop worrying about this.
Yes.
And then after a few days of that, I started putting her back to my breast.
Yeah. And I think Will became an expert at that paced feeding. Someone showed you about how to hold the bottle. Right.
But she's back about her birth weight, beyond her birth weight at 3.5 weeks.
Oh, isn't that amazing?
So we're feeling good.
Yeah, that is. And look at her. Who could argue with somebody looking that
Well, chunk.
strong and